Well, God has a massive plan which He is carrying out. It actually involves billions of people. There are also some major challenges to God's plan. And I wrote about it and said, when we look at the massive plan of God to redeem the human race, it is crucial to focus on the challenges that God has faced in bringing these purposes forward. How does one deal with the ongoing tendency of human beings to follow their own self-serving desires? How does one deal with a rebellious world? It's easy to speak in lofty generalities or suggest philosophical musings about the situation, but God was going to get directly involved with human failings. He was going to get his hands dirty, so to speak, because of the difficulties of human corruption and self-will. God would speak to people at their level to lead them toward his ultimate purposes. Many aspects of the Old Testament are difficult for people to understand today. The ancient origins of the Old Testament explain part of the difficulty. The Old Testament was written thousands of years ago in cultures and time periods very different from our own. These vast differences in culture make many practices in the Old Testament seem strange. Even in comparison with the New Testament writings, there are many aspects of the ancient Old Testament that are quite different. Understanding and making sense of these changes from the Old to New Testament is one of the key purposes of this book. So massive changes. Why did they occur? When looking at the Old Testament, it is striking to consider how many laws and customs no longer apply today in any literal sense. Animal sacrifices have been completely done away with. All of the Old Testament temple regulations, such as laws governing the duties of the priesthood, the placement of the temple furnishings, the offering of incense, the laver for washing, the table of showbread, and the rules concerning sacrifices and offerings, all of these regulations have been set aside and no longer take place anywhere on the earth. In addition to these changes, the numerous Old Testament regulations for clean and unclean foods, various instructions concerning holy days, and attendance at national feasts are no longer physical requirements for those who follow Christ today. Circumcision is no longer a requirement for Christ's followers. And consider the various laws requiring the death penalty in the Old Testament. While these were part of the Old Testament nation, the communities of faith in the New Testament are very different. They do not enact any kind of physical penalties on wrongdoers. And rather than engaging in warfare with enemy nations, the New Testament believers have set aside the sword. The New Testament communities do not raise armies or engage in warfare with enemy nations. They peacefully promote the gospel, seeking only to persuade people with the truth. Why have all of these remarkable changes taken place? Well, these are some of the areas that were so striking to me that I studied them in depth and did my dissertation and wrote on it. And I have created a book on it, and it is called, there it is, Key Connections, Understanding the Changes from the Old to New Testament. And I'm M.A. Erickson. And so these changes were the focus of the book, and I found some very interesting things which I share in the book to make things clearer and to explain some of the reasons those changes took place.